Childhood is one of the most precious, most fragile things. The earth is crawling with predators, monsters that hide in the shadows, preying on our youth. They're creeping all around us, and we don't know until it's too late. I never had kids, and I don't ever want to, knowing what kind of evil is out there. There may never be a stop to any of this. Mallards. What was a supposed kid-friendly establishment is now one of the most critical examples of why we need to do better as a society to protect our children. Fortunately, not everyone is familiar with Mallards, so I will elaborate. Mallards is a Southern-themed amusement place with arcade games and a buffet. It also was a sporting goods store, much like Cabela's or Bass Pro. There were lots of games and fun things to do like go-kart racing. There was only one location. I went there quite a few times for special occasions. It was just so expensive. The food was decent. Southern comfort and barbecue. Can't go wrong. I loved collecting the toy guns at the Prize Center. It was a fun place for what it was. And what it was off. The looks on the employees' faces, the atmosphere, even the smell. Just odd. And don't get me started on those mascot characters. Whoever designed those animatronics could not have possibly made them more uncomfortable to look at, especially Malice, who was the main mascot. He was this fairly large green duck with jagged teeth on his long beak. The eyes on that thing were otherworldly. You'd have to look into them to fully understand. Something was looking back at you. The other two weren't any more pleasant. That's all you need to know for now. It was a Sunday evening. One thing I will go ahead and throw out there is I am deeply involved in drug trading. I've been a dealer since I was 19. I was contacted by a user on Telegram who was given a connection. We exchanged messages setting up a deal. It went as normal as that's supposed to be, aside from the person asking if I was interested in snuff porn. I was in a haze to see that the location of the meetup was at the abandoned entertainment place, Mallards. At that time, I didn't think it was the most bizarre place I'd ever done business at. I didn't see any cops out on my way there. Surely they're all busy with recent events. I pulled up to the little detour you have to take to get to Malice's. I saw a large van parked on the side of the road with all its lights off. That was the only vehicle in the entire area. I pulled up to the place and felt a breeze of nostalgia as I parked my sedan in front of the godforsaken freak show. It was dark, yet I could still see the kid-friendly looking logo of Malice on the top of the front entrance. The duck smiling cheerfully with his wide-open yellow beak. Malice was presumably smiling, but at a certain angle, it looked like he was screaming. The person said to meet at 7 p.m. It was 7:02. There was no one in sight. I unlocked my phone and opened Telegram to message the person. I could see that they already sent a message to me saying they are going to be running a little late and were going to try to arrive before 7:45. I sat back and dozed off in my seat, waiting until that time. It was already 7:50 and still nothing. The person then said the deadline was 9 p.m. I didn't want to stay in that spot any longer, especially with the creepy Malice logo looking at me in my car. Looking back now, this was certainly planned. Right at 9 o'clock was when I received a text message from the person saying, "Get out of the car." I did not know how to react. I checked my surroundings only to faintly notice that one of the front doors to the building was slightly open. I stepped out of my car with my backpack where I had my product concealed. I neared the building until I felt I was close enough and messaged the customer asking, can you see me? There was no response. Not long after, I could hear a very off-putting distant sound coming from inside the building. It was like someone was playing a harmonica incorrectly somewhere inside the entrance. I took a few closer steps until I was closer to the entrance. That was when I began to think I was being set up. I never should have stepped out of my car. I don't know if it was curiosity or something else, but something urged me to enter the dark building. Just as I stepped into the almost pitch-black darkness, I felt the air go flat. There was a ringing silence for what felt like a minute, until it was broken by the entrance doors slamming shut behind me. I finally began to think logically. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. My visibility was limited. The light was bright enough to make me aware of my surroundings, but not all of my surroundings. My first intention was to approach the entrance doors and attempt to open them, as well as calling for help. I wasn't making any progress. My phone lit up from the notification of my customer's new message. It said in all capitals, "Welcome." I messaged back, WTF. It said the message was delivered, but the person had not read it, of course. I turned around to see the same lobby I remembered from the last time I'd been to Malice's. Everything was remotely the same, except noticeably aged and dusty. There was so much floating dust I could see from my flashlight. Dust bunnies were not the only animals this place was infested with. Above the main ticket booth was a painting of Malice waving his wing. Above him were the same large capital letters, "Welcome." I messaged the customer once more saying, "I'm not selling you shit if you don't let me out of here right now. I don't deal to fucking children." The message was opened, but still, the person made no effort to respond. I was in fear of getting caught or robbed. I began to wonder if this was a sting, but what kind of cops would do that? Well, I can think of a few. I made my way past the ticket booth in the lobby. I can't help but describe the aura of that place. The air was thin, but very tense, not soft on the skin. It was so painfully quiet. I moved further past the lobby and into this little gift shop. There were lots of animal plushies, and some were of the automaton characters. There were toy guns and weapons, one in particular being a large plastic meat cleaver with cartoony blood on it called the Pig Skinner. I didn't like that at all. There were also some little action figure sets of hunters and animals, the toy animals being covered with blood and the mini hunters having demonic smiles on their faces. It's no wonder this place was closed down. I maneuvered past the gift shop and toward this large stone column of rocks that had a fish tank in the middle of it. The glass of the fish tank was all green and mossy, and the fish inside decayed long before then. When I passed the stone column, I was in what looked to be a dining area, with the metallic buffet tables. All the trays were empty, thank God. The smell of moldy food was the last thing I needed, even though that would be nothing compared to what I actually saw that day. Around the buffet stand were a couple tables with booths. Above and around them were some fake deer trophies and framed images of nature. The deer were made to look cartoony, but the eyes on them were hyper-realistic. I could swear some of the eyes on those deer heads were following me. I then heard the same harmonica sound from earlier. It was coming from behind the curtains on the main stage. I slowly walked down past the buffet stands and diner tables. The closer I got to the stage, the slower I moved. I was inches away from the stage when I could see a slight crack in the curtains. I shined my light through the open gap of the curtains. I saw a drum set with a large silhouette of a figure behind it. That was when I finally received a message from the customer. The message said, "Are you ready?" I replied saying, "I've been ready since 7 p.m., asshole." They wrote back with a message in all capitals saying, "Showtime." Before I could cringe, I was startled by the entire room around me powering on out of nowhere. the curtains opened up, all the lights came on. My attention was first drawn to the dining area ahead of me, but in seconds, I was reminded of the primary machinery. Said the Malice animatronic. I shouted and jumped off the stage, stumbling onto the hardwood floor of the dining area. I turned around and stood back up to see the 3 withered automatons just barely functioning after the building powered on. I forgot how fucking huge they were. Malice was at least 6'10". His large wingspan and jagged teeth were unquestionably frightening. His freakish, phantom-like eyes were the cherry on top of his demonic appearance. Malice was the singer for the band, but also had a harmonica around his neck that he would play. Next to Malice was an animatronic that was supposed to be a deer, though it looked like a hellish wendigo. His name was Dasher, and he played the banjo. He was so realistic looking. His long antlers looked razor sharp, and his hooves were exceptionally furry and bulky, whereas his arms and torso were veiny and human-like. He was like a centaur. His eyes weren't as ghoulish as Malice's, but they certainly weren't pleasant. Not to mention his large, toothy, and permanent smile built into his head. Even the blood-red gums above his teeth were real-looking. As larger-than-life as Malice and Dasher were, the largest animatronic was the monstrosity behind the drum set. The pig. His name was Skinner the Swine. He was hard to see from where I was looking with the shadow over him, as well as the trash cans and wooden barrels that were supposed to be his redneck drum kit. He was holding 2 raw turkey legs that he used to bang his drums, and the circular saw blades that were supposed to be the cymbals. Malice continued his announcement.
Welcome all in one. It's time to start the show. Who wants to count us down?
There was a pause after that. Malice and Dasher were turning their heads from side to side as if something was supposed to happen. I looked around the room. The pause was painfully long. I even pulled out my phone to see if my nutcase of a customer sent me anything else. I felt vulnerable being in that place while carrying the product in my backpack. After an eternity of silence, I heard what sounded like a rusty metallic door opening. As the sound was heard, the animatronics froze, and their eyes grew wide. As a matter of fact, they were looking right at me. Some kind of machinery started moving in the background. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. That was when I noticed a dark liquid dropping from the ceiling onto the center of the stage. The copper-like smell flew past my nose. I then recognized it to be fresh blood. I still heard the sound of whatever rusty gears were spinning. Given the situation, I was already on edge. But my concept of reality shook when I saw the horrendous sight of a little girl tied to a chain lowering down above the center of the stage. The chain lowered down until the poor girl was hanging right in between Malice and Dasher, from the chain tied around her bleeding arms. She was out cold and bleeding down her legs from under her skirt. I was about to climb onto the stage, but there was a large electric fence that shot up in front of the stage, causing me to leap back onto the floor. I grunted furiously and paced around in front of the barricaded stage. I could see through the sparkling fence that the kid was waking up. She lifted up her head and opened her eyes. The loud sound of sparks shooting from the electric fence was muffled by the girl's shriek of terror. I got as close as I could to the fence without being burnt. I shouted at her, "Hey, can you hear me? I'm gonna get you out of here." She didn't respond. She started dozing. "Hey, stay with me!" I continued shouting. In an instant, the entire building blacked out again. The ringing silence returned. I then heard the sounds of loud, heavy footsteps on the stage, and the rustling of the chains. I couldn't see anything. I reached for my phone. The fence lit up with voltage as the little girl was pressed against it from the other side. The sight of that helpless child banging on the fence while being electrocuted will forever live in my nightmares, as well as her dying shriek. I screamed almost as loud as she did. The room was still black. Nothing was visible.
Welcome to the Madhouse.
The voice of Malice spoke. The power turned back on. The fence was lowered down. The girl was on the floor of the stage, and Malice was standing right at the edge, facing me. I stepped back slowly, wondering how he could have moved there. I looked past Malice at the little girl. I broke down in heavy sobbing as I could see the bruises and cuts all over her. She was beaten and tortured, and probably worse. My attention was drawn to the sound of a crying baby coming from beyond the balcony upstairs. "What the fuck?" I said to myself out loud. I ran around searching for the stairs. I found them at the end of a hallway past the diner area. I sprinted all the way down. As I did, I noticed the doors on the sides that were supposed to be party rooms. At the end of that hallway was a laser tag area called Wolves and Sheep. I reached the end of the hallway and ran up the stairs. I lost control and tripped, stumbling forward onto the platform that divides the two layers of stairs. When I got back up, my whole body froze as I saw the silhouette of Dasher the deer standing at the end of the hallway. I remained frozen, not certain how to react. I began to think it was a costume. No way an animatronic would walk off the stage on its own. It didn't matter then, though. I couldn't withstand a baby being hurt in the same room as me. Not another one, at least. I rushed up the stairs and made it to the second floor, which was a large arcade room. There were game machines everywhere, all powered on and making staticky noises. I heard the baby crying again. I was closer. I ran toward where I could hear it, not paying attention to anything else. I halted my steps in front of a large game machine where the crying was coming from. It was titled Whack-A-Fetus. These little realistic-looking newborn baby heads would come up and make loud crying noises. There was this big stuffed sledgehammer tied to the game machine. On the side of the machine was this artwork of a woman giving birth in a hospital bed. Even in its cartoony style, it graphically showed the head of a crying baby sticking out of the woman's bloody womb. The woman had a deranged, toothy scowl on her face while looking down at the baby, and was holding a sledgehammer about to swing it down toward her newborn child. There was a speech bubble above her that said, "Not again." It pains me to say this, but that wasn't all. I didn't recognize a single game machine there. The next one that caught my eye was this air hockey table, except the two little hockey sticks on the table were made to resemble male genitalia. The comic-like artwork on one side of the table was of Malice and a man in a hockey uniform whose pants were down. Malice was violently jamming a hockey stick into the man's bleeding rectum. On the other side was Skinner, ruthlessly choking a cheerleader while lifting her off her feet. Dasher was on the floor of the ice rink, looking up underneath the cheerleader's skirt and sticking out his long tongue while pleasuring himself. Remember those basketball games you would see at arcades? There was this one game like that called Water Ball. The balls you could throw were blue, and a liquid could be seen sloshing around inside them. Instead of a basketball hoop, there was what looked like a sewage pipe you were supposed to throw the balls into. Behind the goal was this disturbing artwork of anorexic children gathered around the pipe, sticking out their tongues like they were desperately thirsty. I could go on about all the twisted game machines I saw. There were so many. Of all the powered machines, there was one that was out of order. It was like a large Pac-Man machine with a joystick and buttons. The pixelated 2D artwork on the side was of this zombie-like man in a black apron smiling wide, while holding a chainsaw covered in blood. I couldn't see what the title of the game was because the out-of-order sign was covering it. I walked over to the rectangular balcony in the center of the arcade floor. I rested my arms on the railing and took a second to collect my thoughts. What kind of place is this? Clearly it's not for kids. Not anymore, at least. Who would expense their time and money to design all of this? More importantly, how the hell am I going to get out of here? There's no windows and the front entrance is locked from the outside, I thought. I still had my backpack on, with the substance still inside it. I pulled out my phone. It wasn't turning on. That was when my spine went cold as I heard the harmonica playing on the lower floor. It was coming from where the stage was. I walked around the corner of the railing to see the stage from where I was. It was still fairly dark, so I couldn't notice at first, but when I got a clear view of the stage below, my heart sank when I saw that all 3 of the animatronics were gone. I heard the harmonica play again, but it was coming from a completely separate area than from before, but still on the lower floor from where I couldn't see. Not even 10 seconds after that time, and I heard it play on the arcade floor near the stairs. I slowly walked over to where I could see the stairs. I hid behind one of the game machines and peered over to see if someone or something was coming. At that distance, I could hear heavy footsteps moving up the stairs. I kept looking that way. The footsteps got louder and more clearer until they stopped. I was still waiting. My eyes were glued to the top of those stairs. I didn't even blink. Out of nowhere, the harmonica blared from right behind me. Before I could look, the lights turned off, and whatever was moving up the stairs was now sprinting toward me from that direction. My heart was pounding in my chest, almost as fast as the pounding footsteps of whatever was charging after me. The room was increasingly vibrating as it got closer, until it was nearly 2 feet away from me. I lunged to the side and hit the floor before it could get to me. I slowly got up and backed away. I heard the freakish sound of a gravelly snarl. What in creation could make that noise? I was in an almost pitch-black arcade room with something from hell. I couldn't see it, and I hoped it couldn't see me either. I then heard it slowly stomping toward my direction. I crouched down and backed up as slowly as I could.
You can't hide from us. We ain't gonna bite. We live all the critters big and small at Malice Mallard's one and all,
said the shrill voice of Malice.
Oh, especially the little ones. That little squeeze back there could really scream and bleed,
said another voice. The second voice was the one getting closer to me. As they continued, I presumed it to be Dasher's.
I think we outdid ourselves with that one. Seemed to give our new friend here a tremble. It was rather shocking, but we didn't outdo ourselves. That little lamb still had her good parts.
As quietly as I could, I took a deep breath and held it. I turned around and army crawled as far from the 2 figures as I could.
Surely the little pissant didn't crawl too far away. No, he only just got here. I say we let him scurry around some more. Ain't that what they want? Just make sure you grab that bag he's got on. Do what you want when you find him. Just make sure they see it. That won't be hard. They got eyes everywhere. Besides, if I don't get to him, Skinner can.
The second voice paused in their sentence and took a long whiff before continuing.
There he is.
I froze in place in fear for my life. The lights came back on. I couldn't help but stand up and sprint full speed as fast as I could, away from whatever I was in the room with. As soon as I was moving, they were right behind me. I couldn't risk looking to see them, as they were right on my tail. I made it to this nearby room with a pushable door and shoulder bashed it open. As soon as it closed behind me, I turned around and held it shut. It looked to be a party room with tables, but the lights were off. The room had a window, unlike the other rooms I'd seen so far. The person on the other side attempted to push the door open. again heard them snarl before stomping away. I remained pressing the door shut until a brief moment of silence deemed it necessary to let go. The silence was only temporary, as I then heard my pursuer sprinting toward the door. I ran and hid behind one of the tables where the chairs would hopefully cover me in the dark room. Right as I crouched down was when the door bashed down off of its hinges. My heart was still throbbing against my chest like a battering ram. All I could see from behind the table were the mangy hooves of Dasher the deer. He took 2 steps into the party room. The moonlight through the window casted a shadow of his massive figure and long antlers on the wall beside me. I could tell from his shadow that he was facing the table I was behind. The shadow on the wall grew larger as his footsteps came closer. "Dasher?" The voice of a young boy called out. Dasher stood upright and turned around. There was a kid standing in the doorway. I couldn't see his face from where I was looking. "Dasher, I want to go home," said the boy. Dasher didn't respond. He stepped closer to the boy, and I could see from Dasher's shadow that he was licking his teeth. I was still contemplating the fact that I was being pursued by a fucking robot, but that didn't stop me. I stood up and picked up a chair from the table. The kid looked over at me. Dasher was about to turn and face me before I threw the chair at him, causing him to stagger. I then grabbed another chair and swung it straight into Dasher's snout. He roared with rage. I grabbed the kid's arm and bolted down the arcade room. "What's going on?" the boy asked me. "Just run," I answered, shouting. I got to the center where the balcony divided the 2 hallways. I went down the one on the right that was closer. We were halfway down the hallway seconds after we cut the corner, only to be stopped by the echoing harmonica coming from the end of the hallway. The lights turned off for a couple seconds. When they came back on, Malice was standing at the end. He spread his massive wings and unhinged his beak while his horrible blue eyes still pierced through my soul even at that distance. "This way, come on!" I grabbed the kid's shoulder and we ran the other direction. Dasher nearly caught up to us when we moved around the balcony railing. The kid was in front of me, but he wasn't as fast. As soon as I could feel Dasher's wretched breath on the back of my neck, I picked up the kid off his feet and carried him over my shoulders. Once we got to the stairs, I knew we'd be slowed down. I set the kid down and told him to run down the stairs and meet me in the stage area. I turned around to see Dasher charging at me while roaring like a grizzly. When he got within a couple yards away, he lowered his head to where his antlers were pointing at me. Right before he could hit me, I got on all fours and planked, causing Dasher to trip over me and tumble down the steps. I got up and sprinted full speed down the hallway until I once again got to the balcony. I climbed over the railing and was standing on the edge. I looked down and took a deep breath. Dasher had no quit in him. He was already sprinting back down the hallway. I thought it would be best to wait until he was close before jumping. But when I turned around, Malice was on the other side of the railing. I screamed and fell off the balcony. The buffet station broke my fall. And it certainly broke something else. I landed on my side. One of my ribs was cracked. As I was groaning in pain, I vomited a little onto the floor. "Are you okay?" asked the kid. "Yeah, I can walk," I replied. "Hey, what's your name? How'd you get in here?" I asked him. "I'm Charlie. I've been here almost a week. They locked me up in this room," he weakly said to me. "I'm Roger. So they kidnapped you, right?" I asked him. Charlie nodded his head. "You must be starving," I added. "They kept me fed at least," said Charlie. "They told me I was dead. At first I believed them, but I know I'm not dead, because I could feel what they were doing to me. He continued. I sighed and clenched my jaw before asking, "What did they do to you?" He took a gulp and answered, "Same thing they do to the other kids, like on the show." "The show? What show?" I asked. "Malice and Friends," Charlie answered. "Charlie, what did they do?" I asked him. A tear ran down my face as I did. Charlie remained blank and simply said, "I just want to go home." "We'll get out of here, don't worry. We just have to find somewhere where they can't get us," I said. Charlie began walking down the main hall past the stage and said, "The playground is this way. That's where I was hiding." Beyond the stage and further was this large open doorway leading into a giant room with playground equipment and slides with crawl tunnels that were made to look like tree houses, with logs connecting them. The rubber floor was made to resemble cartoon grass. The indoor playground itself was over 2 stories high. The treehouse tunnels led all the way to the top, near the ceiling, which I thought was hazardous. I looked at Charlie and asked, "Why did you speak to Dasher? Why would you come out and talk to him if you were hiding?" Charlie stopped and looked back at me. "I wasn't hiding from Dasher," he explained. I then asked, "Who all is running this place? It's not just the animatronics, is it?" There was a pause. Charlie grew an ominous look in his eyes. "They're not animatronics." Before I could ask anything else, all in 1 second, the whole building blacked out once again, and I felt a rush of wind blowing past me like a speeding car. "Charlie?" I called out. I then heard the muffled sounds of Charlie's screams coming from above me. The lights came back on, and this time, everything was brighter. I looked up to see Malice posted up on the very top of the log tunnels. His right claw was wrapped around Charlie's face and holding him off the edge, about to drop him. No, wait! Malice, with his left claw, grabbed both of Charlie's ankles and stretched out his body. "No, hold on, wait!" Malice unhinged his beak, revealing his rows of jagged teeth, and rapidly chomped down on Charlie's abdomen. Charlie shrieked like a banshee as blood was spewing from his punctured belly. Malice chomped down again and again until he finally bit through the spine, and Charlie was in 2. I fell to my knees screaming. The 2 halves of Charlie's body were like 2 pouring faucets of red water and entrails. His little intestines spilled out and smacked to the floor. Malice threw down the lower half. Blood splashed onto my face when Charlie's legs hit the floor in front of me. Malice then reached into the opening of Charlie's top half and held it up by the spine. He opened his beak and bit off Charlie's head, like it was a cherry off its stick. Blood poured down Charlie's neck hole until it slowed down into small leakage. Malice then threw down the top half of Charlie. I became dizzy from the wretched smell of the fresh blood spilled all over the floor. The lights shut off again for a couple seconds, then when they came back on, Malice was right in front of me with Charlie's head still in his mouth. Malice chomped down his beak, crushing Charlie's head. That diabolical bird was covered in that poor kid's blood, especially around his leaking beak.
"Why don't you hand over the bag?"
said Malice.
"You're here to make a deal, ain't you? Well, I'm looking to buy."
He continued. "I'm getting the fuck out of here," I beamed at him.
"You ought to PG-rate that potty mouth, mister. You know there's kids around,"
said Malice. "What are you?" I asked.
"I'm whatever they pay me to be,"
he answered. "Who's they?" I asked. Malice raised up his wing and pointed his claw toward the TV that was on the wall. The screen came on, and it displayed the live footage of the room we were in. I could see myself and Malice. I looked around and used the TV to match where the camera was. It led to the fake deer trophy mounted on the wall, just like the ones I noticed before. I looked back at the screen to see that it had changed to some kind of animated cartoon with an upbeat song playing. It showed the three characters in cartoon form dancing on the stage with a group of kids below them dancing as well. It then displayed the title, Malice and Friends, before showing camera footage of these kids playing in the wolves and sheep laser tag room. One kid with a sheep vest got tagged by another kid wearing a wolf vest. The kid wearing the sheep vest began horrendously screaming and panicking while trying to take the vest off. The kids wearing the wolf vests backed away, as the one in the sheep vest was then being electrocuted by his vest until his head exploded all over the walls. It cut to another clip of kids racing on the go-kart track. It seems to be the end of the race, as the kids were very noticeably relieved as they all crossed the finish line. This big fence rose up from the ground in front of the finish line before the last kid in the race could cross it. The girl who was last started screaming as she realized she didn't make it. She desperately tried to get out of her cart, but she was trapped in. Her cart then exploded. Blood splattered everywhere as pieces of the little girl flew in every direction. The third clip was of a boy hanging from a hook on the ceiling. The words, "Birthday Boy," were carved into his chest, and the party hat on his head was the only thing he was wearing. The door to the room opened, and Dasher walked in. Dasher reached behind his back and seemingly zipped down his suit. I refused to believe my eyes when I saw a completely skinless, humanoid creature walk out from behind the Dasher suit. It had a long, bloody snout just like the mask. I couldn't look away. It left bloody prints where it stepped. Once it was close to the boy, it opened its mouth and stuck out its tongue before the screen glitched out with static. I looked back toward Malice. He took off the head part of his suit, and what was underneath was nothing a sane mind could comprehend. It was like a skinless, mutated vulture with those same haunted eyes glowing. I couldn't even feel myself standing in that room. It was as if that thing was consuming my soul by showing its true form. My legs became wobbly, and I fell to my knees. The room was getting darker, and everything was slower. Malice somehow became closer to me without even taking any steps. His gory red beak slowly unhinged by the second until it was wide enough to swallow me whole. I gazed into that creature's dark red mouth like it was its own gateway into hell before I heard a sound coming from somewhere else in the building. Malice's eyes widened. He closed his beak and slowly whispered, "Don't worry. You're about to get what you came for." The lights turned off, and not long after, I passed out. While I was out, I had a dream that I was in a hospital bed, paralyzed. I couldn't move, but could see ahead of me a long hallway leading into pitch black darkness. I could see someone in a wheelchair at the end of the hall slowly rolling toward me. The sound of the wheelchair rolling sounded very heavy and rusted. As they rolled out further into the light, I could see that the person in the wheelchair was my dad. His face was completely pale and emotionless, exactly how he was on his deathbed. I screamed and cried, and still did when I woke up. I was in a large, bright room hanging from the ceiling. My hands were chained. I was about 30 feet in the air. The room below me seemed to be a swimming pool, empty of water, but not of people. There were at least 50 kids down there from all ages. They were all running around. Not a single one of them was wearing any clothes at all, and I wasn't either. We were all completely stripped. I noticed the powder in some of their noses. They had all taken the product I had come to sell. They couldn't stop moving and running around, pacing. The walls of that room had painted trees with dancing children and singing frogs. There were deer cameras in multiple places of the room. I shook and writhed on the hanging chain, but not to any luck. On the higher platform of the pool, there was a large metallic door that started rising up. Standing on the other side was the pig. Skinner the swine. I had first seen his grotesque appearance in clear light. His headpiece looked like a cartoon pig, except it was extremely lifelike. He was massive, the biggest one of the three. His pink arms were veiny and swollen, filling out his blue denim vest and white t-shirt. He had matching blue denim jeans and black cowboy boots. He was holding what looked to be a baseball bat with built-in spinning saw blades at the top. It was like a portable meat grinder. Skinner walked toward the edge of the pool. Each of his footsteps sounded like dropping anvils on the floor. He revved up his grinder and began speaking in his guttural, raspy voice. Skinner jumped down into the pool with the kids. They all screamed and tried to back away. Skinner swung his grinder down into the head of a younger boy, causing his brains to discharge. He went on a rampage, swinging the bat everywhere. I can't recover from the sounds of those soul-wrenching screams as they were cut open and mutilated. He drove the end of his bat into the stomach of one older, heavy-set girl and revved the blades. Blood spewing and intestines flying while the girl shrieked. He took out two kids with one swing through the first one's head and into the second one's chest. 3 kids managed to climb up out of the pool and run toward the room Skinner came out of, but the door slammed shut. Skinner looked over at the 3 kids by the door and made an ear-piercing squeal. Right after he did, the door opened up. Dasher came sprinting out and used his antlers to ram into the 3 kids, killing 2 of them. One fell to the floor bleeding and tried to crawl away before Dasher bit out a chunk of their neck. Dasher jumped into the pool with Skinner and the remaining kids. I was still shaking and yanking on the chain. Every muscle was hurting and my arms were burning from soreness. I looked down to see those 2 freaks slashing into the drugged children running around them aimlessly. Skinner swung his bat into the back of an older boy, causing him to fall to the floor of the pool, paralyzed. Skinner grabbed another boy close by and skewered both of his legs off with one swing of his grinding bat. He then threw the legless boy on top of the paralyzed boy, raised up his bat, pressed a button to stop the revving saw blades, then bludgeoned the 2 boys at an inhuman speed, causing consecutive splashes of blood and organs, some of it getting onto my legs. Dasher was pinning down this older girl and pounding his fists into her head until her face caved into her crushed skull. He then grabbed her leg and yelled, then threw her towards Skinner, who swung into the girl midair, splitting her in half. There were nearly 10 kids left at that point. Some of them had climbed out of the pool while the rest were still stuck. Dasher and Skinner then started a routine with the remaining kids. Skinner would shove a kid toward Dasher, who had rammed them with his antlers back towards Skinner, finishing them off with the bat. The 4 remaining kids on top of the floor outside the pool were huddled together. 2 younger girls that looked to be twins, an older boy and another girl. Skinner used his bat to shred the remains of the fallen bodies in the blood-filled pool. There were dismantled parts and bodies everywhere, limbs, bones, rib cages, and jawbones. Some of them were so shocked that they defecated before they were torn apart. Blood wasn't the only fluid filling the pool. There was one girl that was still alive in the pool, on the ground whimpering and sobbing. Her left knee was bashed in, her leg was bent backwards. Dasher slowly approached her and got on all fours. He crawled over to her and started licking the foot of her broken leg. He then moved closer, and I will go ahead and leave out what he did next. I just hope she didn't feel all of it. I was defeated. The chain was not breaking. Skinner blended up all the human remains until all the blood filled up the pool. It was warm and steaming. Skinner climbed out and power walked over to the 4 kids in the corner. They panicked and ran in all directions. Skinner picked up the 2 twins by their necks and kneeled over the edge of the pool and shoved their heads into the blood to drown them. Dasher grabbed onto the older boy's neck with both his hands and forced his head into the pool as well. As Dasher was drowning that boy, he was also attacking him from behind. The other girl that was still roaming free picked up Skinner's bat and snuck up behind him. That was when I saw the opportunity and gained the power to kick up in the air and yank down on the chain with all my strength. After the second yank, it finally began to break loose from the ceiling. The one girl raised up the bat, but Skinner noticed and at the speed of light took the bat from her, threw it into the blood pool, then grabbed her neck and lifted her off her feet. I started swinging on the chain backwards and forward to where Skinner and the girls were. I got a good enough motion, and once I swung forward close enough, I yanked the chain out of the ceiling and landed onto Skinner's back. I threw my chained hands over his head and pulled back on his neck to choke him. Skinner turned his back to the wall and ran backwards, bashing me into the wall. Dasher pulled the older boy out of the pool and threw him aside before he stood up. Skinner threw himself downward, causing me to fly over him and into the pool. I've certainly made wrong choices in my life, more than I can count. But I don't think I really deserve to know what it's like swimming in human blood. The smell, the taste, all of it sticking to me, going up my nose, getting in my eyes. As soon as I rose up out of the surface, I screamed like an infant. I wiped the blood from my eyes to see Skinner jump down into the pool and stomp toward me. I couldn't move around him because he took up almost the whole width of the pool. I raised up my hands that were still bound by the chain. Skinner reached down into the pool, grabbed the chain I was on, and tugged me across the pool and into his gripping hand on my neck. I was face to face with the pig. He whispered as he glared into me with his fiendish yellow eyes. He slammed me down below the surface of blood and pressed down on my chest with his foot. I tried to squeeze out from under and push his leg off me, but it was completely immovable. I flailed my bound arms, losing breath, about to die, drowning in blood. I felt a stinging puncture on my hands when I cut them on something at the bottom of the pool. I cautiously felt around to realize it was Skinner's bat. As I grabbed the handle, I was almost out. I felt around the handle for a button and pressed it, revving the saw blades. With both my hands together, I raised up the bat and drove the spinning blades into the center of Skinner's torso. I heard him squeal from above the surface. He fell back, freeing me. I rose above the surface and threw up the blood that got in my lungs. I heard Dasher unleash a feral roar. I wiped my eyes and looked around the room to see where he was, but before I could spot him, he rammed his antlers into my back and bashed me into the wall at the end of the pool. I lost grip of the bat and it slipped out of my hands. I felt all 8 points of that wild buck's horns stick into me like wooden needles. The blood from my back added to the pool when Dasher pulled out his antlers. I could see that the bat was on the higher platform ahead of me. I attempted to climb up, but Dasher rammed into my back once more. He pulled out again and stepped back further. He roared louder than any time prior and started charging. I turned around and caught his antlers in my bound chains. He viciously flailed his head until he broke free by breaking the chain, and the stupid bastard freed me as well. He charged forward again. Within a second, I pressed my now able hands on the edge of the pool, jumped up, and kicked Dasher back with both my feet, also causing me to fly backward out of the pool and onto the higher ground. I quickly picked up the bat and turned around. Dasher took one more charge and jumped out of the pool, throwing up his arms to grab me. He was stopped when I swung the revving bat into his face. He fell to the floor next to me. His snout was crushed. I tried not to laugh as he pathetically screamed in pain. Behind his crushed snout was another skinless set of teeth, not much different than my own. I thought they were animatronics. Then I perceived them as creatures from hell. But no, they were people, human beings, with the same weak points as me. I drove the revving blades into Dasher's crotch. He shrieked helplessly like Bambi. I grinded off his legs, then his arms, grabbed his antlers, and threw him into the pool to drown. I picked up the bat and pressed the button to rev it up as I saw that Skinner was above the surface, leaning on the right edge of the pool. He said. I walked over to him, gripping his own bat. I froze to the sound of the harmonica. I looked over to the door to see it was raised up, and Malice was standing in front of it, holding a bolt-action rifle.
"Put that down,"
said Malice. "Shoot me," I shouted.
"You know what you just did? Our live stream just made $10,000 in viewer donations. I don't know how the hell you pulled all that off, but it filled my pockets,"
he said. I was a deer in headlights. "You're lying," I whimpered. Malice looked over at the 4 children trembling in the far corner. He looked back at me.
"You want to take them home?"
he asked, softly. I nodded my head rapidly. Malice lowered his rifle.
"I'll walk you out."
I made a deal with the Mallard. All 4 of the surviving kids were returned home. I was blackmailed and offered multiple jobs to keep my life by this company or cult, whatever these people are. I thought I was involved with the criminal underground before I entered the Madhouse, but now I live in a true world of sin and despair. The job I was selected for is the position of a Hell Knight. It's basically the security and enforcement for the worst human beings imaginable. The job would be to discreetly guard a building or area that is in the presence of content being created. I refused. Due to my reluctancy, I am now an executive for something called the Carnadome, where I will be tested. As I'm finishing this narrative, a team of Hell Knights have already arrived to escort me. The van that I see on my property is identical to the one I saw before I arrived at Malice's that night. They are at my door now. I don't know what's going to happen to me, and I'm not certain anybody will even read this. God let me save 4 children. Maybe he wants me to save more.